n'enregistre peut-être pas tout de suite. Oh, si, il est là, oui. Ok. On y va? So, ladies and gentlemen, at first I want to apologize for the delay. We were supposed to broadcast the webinar from Borovets ski resort in Bulgaria, where I participated to the International Society for Comparative Physical Education and Sports conference, but unfortunately the internet was not performant enough and it was impossible to work that way. I thank all the participants and Orsholia, our webmaster. Thanks to her, it will be soon possible to organize a webinar anywhere in the world in a near future, and she prepares a platform for the next EARNIST results. So now, what about the conference topic? Sport tourism research and comparative studies, prospects for a community of practice. In 2012, Gibson wrote that very little empirical research exists that has focused on the tourism-related benefits and other impacts that small-scale sports events can have for a community. This statement echoes the observation of Laperoni, who in 2009 wrote in a paper about socioeconomic impact of a series of marathons in France that a field of exploration of sport tourism generated by sport events and related to a specific activity is the most important term here, seem to remain virtually unexplored. Also, this observation was made about a European country. It also seems to apply to the United States. However, in 2016, study focusing on the sole review sport and tourism counted 30 different definitions for sport tourism between 1993 and 2014. The term sport tourism was first coined 30 years ago in 1987 by De Knop. Since then, the amount of literature and conferences about sport tourism has increased considerably. And yet, we still don't know what the expression sport tourism includes, as the scientific community has never been able to agree on one definition. If we focus on the typology developed by the pioneers of the field, notably Gibson and Pijassou, they distinguish several factors generating sport tourism. Here with Gibson we see three domains of sport tourism, and if we compare Gibson and Pijassou, we've got sport tourism for action, sport tourism for entertainment, cultural or history sport tourism, plus, coming from Pijassou, activism for sport tourism, which means participating in the organization of a sport for a compete, working in a federation, and so on and so on. It means that a trip can only enter the category of sport tourism if the initial motivation of the tourist is one of these elements. Let's take an example. Following this logic, if during a conference or a business trip, we have the opportunity to go for mountain biking, stop to a local restaurant for lunch, and then to attend a high-level sports event. This activity wouldn't be taken into account in the analysis of the impact of sport tourism on the local community, because only our trip was not initially motivated by sport tourism, but by the conference or the business meeting. Thus, neither the money spent on equipment rental, tickets, food would be counted as part of the sport tourism activity, sport tourism impact. And yet, this kind of sport tourism that I call opportunity sport tourism, that Gammon and Robinson called tourism sports in 1997, but I cannot keep this word because it's a joke in English. I cannot translate it in French. This opportunity sport tourism generates jobs, business, and pays for salaries and taxes, all of which have secondary and tertiary impacts. Considering only one aspect of sport tourism based on an essentially sociological approach means disregarding a whole set of activities generated by sport tourism, I mean the economic side. Defining the field of action of sport tourism is essential. As Voltaire said once, if you wish to converse with me, first define your terms. However, I will deliberately not get into the debate regarding the very definition of sport tourism, as I have recently published several articles on this very topic. The various definitions or discussion lead me to introduce the core of my topic, comparative studies in the field of sport tourism. Laperoni, again, noted in 1909 that most sources analyze the concept of sport tourism differently. The logical question that comes to mind is why and what can be done to solve this problem? So, what are the origin of the fragmentation of the concept of sport tourism? Due to the editorial policies of the scientific reviews, as well as the very inner working of the academic system, the authors tend to look for a niche that will allow them to develop a form of erudition. Caesar once said, "I would rather be first in this small village than second in Rome." The same logic is probably applied by the academics. So first, the fragmentation of the field was caused by a multiplication of sub-fields. For instance, for Ricardo Melo, no consensus has been obtained, and for now there is no term universally accepted to refer to sport activities taking place in natural areas, because each term has its semantic difference that represents distinctive ways of looking at this phenomenon. Bouchard in 2004 states that there are currently 6 generic terms used in the French language to designate activities taking place in the natural areas: open air sports, physical activities in nature, sports activities in nature, nature activities, sport leisure natures, and sport tourism. And she continues arguing that each term has its own connotation and refers to large paradigms in the world of sport that took place at different times of evolution of such activities, namely health, hygiene, education, competition, environment, leisure, and economy, which clearly means that sport tourism is directly linked to economy. Then comes fragmentation into subsections: cycling, surfing, horse riding, motorbiking, hiking, and so on and so forth. Each author lead their own and usually monodisciplinary study and follow their own methodology. It is even more obvious during conferences, as most presentation focus on a particular sport or event with a title generally ending with the case of. For instance, a characterization of alpine summer sport tourists, the case of Tyrol, Austria, and so on and so forth. In this condition, it is impossible to develop synthetic studies because the various elements and fragmentation of and dissimilar. It is difficult to compare or to combine them. Hence, the critical lack of theoretical approach necessary to structure the field of sport tourism. Other close fields of study, like tourism for instance, have reached this point a long time ago. On a practical standpoint, today all these differences are a limit to the visibility of what is sport tourism. They restrict the possibility to evaluate its sociologic impact, and it is a barrier to the creation of global development policies for sport tourism. This idea is even more important as, following Boucher and Boiswala, on the political level, sport tourism generates development and territory planning. On the social level, on top of the links it creates between individuals, it helps the integration of local population through employment and participates to the education of locals and foreigners about their civil and environmental rights and duties. And economically, it undoubtedly generates business, more or less depending on the seasons following the area and the activity. And it helps creating companies, jobs, activities, and wealth. Now we have detected the problem. The only thing left to do is to solve it. So, what is the socio-economic of semi-marathons? And it is part of an international experimental study we did. When I say we, I mean the IRNIS, International Research Network in Sport Tourism. This network is a non-profit association gathering academics and professionals. Since 2010, it is working on bringing answers to the question about sport tourism. It all began with a simple question: how can sport tourism become a tool for local sustainable development? Here, the term sustainable is understood in the way introduced by the Brundtland report, that is to say, a growth where the economic, the social, and the environmental aspects are balanced. Since its creation, most of the inner working of the IRNIS has been modified. However, its scientific objective remains the same: the study of every facet of the sport tourism and especially its contribution to local development. One aspect naturally imposes itself as central to the works of the group: international comparison, or at least the study of cultural interaction within the field of sport tourism. We will develop what could be achieved in the field by introducing a methodology that allows comparative study and its possible issues. Following the data issued from the Federation, both the number of runners and the number of events have strongly increased over the last few years, all over the world and mostly in Occident. On the one hand, many private organizers, I mean for-profit companies, have joined the market. On the other hand, many new kinds of events have appeared, Some, like the Mud Day, are strongly inspired by the obstacle races found in the military. Others are based on folklore, like, for instance, the Color Mirad, where the participants have to run through areas where they are bombarded with colored powder. There are many other new types of events, each of them featuring a specific characteristic that makes it more difficult and non-traditional. A research project on the impact of a marathon on the organizing community came to life in 2015. Why focusing on road running specifically? Essentially, because, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's quoted that it's quoted that very few studies focus on a precise category of events, not on one event in particular, but on a whole category. At first, for 5 or 6 partners from as many countries from Europe joined this project. The goal was to agree upon a common way to lead a study about the impact of a marathon. The national team leaders worked together to design a common methodology. The major aspects of the research project were predetermined by the initiators of the project, while the construction of the specific questionnaire and the methodology were subject to international collaboration. The goal was to publish national, then regional and international results. The common methodology was completed by a common model for statistical analysis, a standardized structure, and a uniform style of paper writing. The project was rapidly advertised via the EARNIST newsletter, and many new members quickly volunteered to join. In total, 14 countries integrated the project: Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, Portugal, Spain, Italy, France, Switzerland, Croatia, Romania, Czech Republic, Hungary, and even Canada and Brazil. 13 of them stayed until the end of the study. It is then that the first issue came up. First, we had to decide what kind of event would be the subject of the topic. Indeed, if marathons are common in France, for instance, it's not the case for all countries. Some countries actually feature very few road running events. So we decided to focus on half marathons because they are more frequent. We were aware that the local impact of a half marathon wouldn't probably be the same from one of a marathon. But that was not really our point. Our goal was to lead a scientific experiment. Still, are all half marathons comparable? The number of participants varies, as does the size of the city, the community hosting the event. It was therefore necessary to set up a table taking a number of criteria into account as a common tool to all participants. Once all the participants had agreed on the kind of race and on the size of the event, and of course of the size of the host city, it was necessary to precise and define the objective and the methodology of the research. We organized several virtual meetings and retained 2 lines of research. First, the socio-economic impact of the race, including the runners' motivation, their budget, their place of origin, and so on and so forth. And secondly, the way the organizers used the event to benefit and develop the tourism sector. This second line of research follows the one adopted lately by the Anglo-Saxon literature that focuses on small-scale events. Wilson defines the small-scale event as where competitors may outnumber the spectators, often held annually, with little national media interests and limited economic activity compared to the large-scale events, of course. In 1999, Hayam seems to be the first to emphasize the positive aspects of small-scale events due to the relatively low organization costs, the use of pre-existing facilities, the low environmental impact, the dynamic impact on local population, and so on and so forth. At that time, most studies were only focusing on mega events, especially, of course, the Olympics and the FIFA World Cup. The North American studies studied and they focused on small-scale events, and they came to the conclusion that having a portfolio of small-scale sport events on a given territory is highly beneficial, not only to the development of the tourism-related economic activities, especially, of course, the service industry, but also to the local population as it generates jobs and training. The sport commissions work on developing these aspects of sport events. Concerning the sport commissions. For instance, here we've got the Vancouver Sport Commission, who precisely says the Sport Commission job, which positively influence the quality of life and economic vitality of Clark County. Or for Chicago, the activity of the Sport Commission that will positively impact the city's economy. So the Sports Commission work on developing these aspects of sport events, turning sports into a factor of value chain, and sport is so an input for the economic and a stimulating offer for the marketers. The following step was rather easy. Two semi-structured questionnaires were addressed to the event organizers and to the town official, and a closed-ended questionnaire was addressed to the runners in order to determine their profile, their place of origin, where they came, whether they came accompanied or not, if they slept on site, where, how much money they spent, what for, their motivation for entering the competition, and so on and so forth. At first, this questionnaire was written in English, and then they were translated in the language of the participant and adjusted to fit the characteristics of the targeted country. For example, the income bracket of the participant varied following the country. The questionnaires were mostly sent via the internet. Only two respondents filled them in on the spot. All surveys but one have been completed so far, and after the results have been published independently for each race, we will issue a book comparing the results grouped by greater area, Maghreb, Northern, Central and Southern Europe, and others, as well as all the results in a whole, as a whole. So what are the main results of the study? This international study was limited in several ways. For instance, the number of cases studied in each country was very low, only one, and respecting the norms regarding the size of the town, the number of runners, was in fact very difficult for the participant. However, it brought up three elements of knowledge beyond the factual study. First, it's possible to compare similar sport events on an international level due to a common evaluation tool. Putting together a common methodology will allow us to analyze other aspects of sport tourism in the future with an unprecedented level of skill and experience. Second, after the event, an expert in international studies ran an ex-post analysis of our empirical methodology. It will allow us to correct it so that future works can be based on the same approach. The conclusions of this work were that the success of the project lies on three major elements: the relevance of the methodology, the attitude of the national team leaders, and a managerial approach of the project known as project cycle management. A communication platform is under construction, and it will allow the researchers participating in future studies to access all the elements that they can all follow, and so that they can all follow the same pattern and communicate with each other and with the initiators. And third, results. We acquire the possibility to compare our results to the Anglo-Saxon literature regarding the socio-economic value of small-scale events. The conclusion will allow us to confirm or to disconfirm the interest of the multiplication of small-scale events emphasized by multiple authors. The multicultural dimension of this approach was an element of essential added value, as it highlighted the different ways to address an issue that at first appeared very simple: the socio-economic impact of the organization of a half marathon in a mid-sized town. First, it appeared that there are major differences between the countries participating to the project. Also, this work allows us to reconsider the theoretical conclusion of the Anglo-Saxon researchers. It clearly appears that on the west side of the Atlantic, sport is considered as a good conveyor of economy as any other sector, whereas in the east side, approaching the field is completely different. It is a cultural issue and one of the limits of globalization, particularly encountered in the sphere of leisure and sport tourism, deeply related to culture and called glocalization. So, what about sport tourism and glocalization? The development of road running is an obvious consequence of the general globalization of sports. Among the many definitions of globalization, one corresponds particularly well to the subject of our research, a phenomenon that tends to be progressively generalized globally, about to become common to numerous countries or numerous people. An increasing number of countries offer running competitions, even if they are not culturally or historically part of their culture. Their origin can be found in the West, that, for mostly economical reasons, is a producer and exporter of innovative sport practices. Mackintosh wrote that commerce followed the flag and sport followed the commerce. What was true in the 19th century is not so true today. The broadcasting channels are somewhat different now. High-level sport has become a product. As such, it is part of the economic sphere and is therefore subject to globalization. All of the modern image-based media fight for the broadcasting rights of sport events because they attract viewers, which consequently increases the cost of commercial inserts, which in turn boost the broadcaster profits. Broadcasted worldwide, the images contain cultural elements that convey new ideas. Does the development of globalization, at least on the level of sport tourism, go without facing resistance from the population who discover new practices, admittedly tempting, but that do not always correspond to their habits and culture? The future of globalization is particularly interesting when addressing the prospect of glocalization. The term is a neologism that finds its origin in Japan and merged the word globalization and localization. It means adapting a product to a selling area to a cultural target. Both the fields of sport and sport tourism offer perfect example of global development of several markets that are strongly impacted by local culture. Let us consider the example of the ski market. Today, in Occident, it is a stagnated market. The number of skiers does not increase anymore and even tends to decrease. The competition is getting stronger between the Western Europe winter sport resorts that have been historically present on the market, such as France, Austria, Switzerland, Italy, and a number of Central European countries that can now offer services close to the one of the market leaders for a drastically cheaper price. In this climate, local culture and folklore can be attracting factors for foreign customers. This example is a typical local clientele. The example of the development of winter sport in China is remarkable. There are approximately 75 million skiers worldwide. In 2011, China counted 3 million of them. The Chinese government based its ski development policy on the Western development pattern for sport tourism. Before China was granted the 2022 Winter Olympic, its objective was to reach 7 million of skiers in 2020 and up to 120 million 10 or 20 years later. But when the country was granted the 2022 Winter Olympics, so it was in 2015, it re-evaluates its goal to reach 300 million skiers, which is about 4 times the number of skiers worldwide today. We can easily imagine the reaction of all actors involved in the field of winter sport when facing such a programmed revolution. However, a primarily survey realized early 2017 by 2 colleagues of mine, Sarah Michler and Arnaud Waquet, will clearly emphasize the limitation of the Western model for winter sports in China. The Chinese do not plan on spending a whole week in a winter sport resort. They do not know about any brand of equipment, skis, or clothing. They have no interest in the subject as they only ski 1 to 3 hours a day before spending their time in a restaurant with their friends. We can imagine the effort that the producers of goods and services will have to go through to seduce the Chinese clientele. At the same time, in the Chinese universities, the research teams focus on how to use the Olympic effect to develop sport tourism in some specific area, and especially the ones that had not been yet benefited from the financial takeoff of the country, but that possess a natural potential. Thus, if the development model adapted by the country was partially imported, it also went through major modifications to fit in the local culture. Conclusion. So focusing on sport tourism and more particularly on developing a methodology allowing to compare sport events on an international level, emphasize the advantages and difficulties to compare international issues, especially culturally. Still, building up coherent sport tourism development policies requires a strong knowledge of every niche of the field on a macro level, not only nationally, but also and above all, internationally. Being aware of what exists in other parts of the world is a gain of time, as it helps to avoid making mistakes that have already been made. It is noticeable in the policies led by winter sport resorts regarding global warming and the lack of snow, and when selecting a location for a new golf course, for instance. This process requires international multidisciplinary research to set up network of academic and professionals in order to study and study all aspects of the various issue. The example of the situation in China highlighted a number of restrictions to globalization. Even if behavioral patterns are not always limited by borders, the response of local population requires the producer to adapt their offer to local culture. We can imagine that a back and forth phenomenon will come in the near future in the countries that originated the original patterns. The globalization of sport and sport tourism is not only the only example of Western patterns exported to other countries that so far had no access to that kind of leisure. The flow of people and the mixing of cultures influence the commercial sphere and force the exporters to adapt their offers so it can meet local expectations. Cultural trends can sometimes reverse commercial trends and might generate a phenomenon of feedback. As you can see, the field of sport tourism comprises numerous and diverse research approaches. There is a crucial need for empirical knowledge in order to reach the theoretical level. That is why it is vital to set up international multidisciplinary research team. I thank you for your attention. If you want to ask questions, you can send them writing at the bottom line of your computer. So I see one or two questions already arriving. Do you think it's possible to construct a methodology which would be reliable for comparison of the impact of not European country? Of course, my answer is directly positive. It will be more difficult, especially because of the difference of culture, but we can imagine exactly the same methodology after that. The analyze will be more, must be more precise and more adapted to each country. But I think that it would be really very, very rich to compare different countries like USA, Chinese, and Japan. And another question, can you tell us something about consumers? What about their expectation? Do they expect the same type and quality of services internationally? I think that there was I already partly answered in my speech. I am not a specialist of consumering and marketing. That is why I told you we must work at an interdisciplinary level, international and interdisciplinary. Of course, the consumer are not waiting for the same services everywhere in the world. That's why we must know what they are waiting for. And so, but that's not our job. The producers and the exporters can adapt their produce. Okay, I don't see any more questions, so I thank you very much for your attention and for spending some time listening to what I explained. I would like to invite you, if it's not already done, to subscribe on the Ernest as an Ernest
website?
Yeah, on the Ernest website. And we will have the next webinar probably at the end of the year now. I invite you, if you want to be part of this webinar, I mean, if you want to speak, to be the speaker at this webinar, to contact me. It will be with great pleasure that I will study your proposal. Thank you very much to everyone. Thanks to Orshoya, because without her, no webinar. Okay, bye-bye. Thank you. Stop sharing. It's done.
Stop recording.
Pardon? Ah oui, stop recording.